For 300 years, the Vorithaean Empire had an iron grip on the galaxy. This wasn't some exaggeration. It was a cold, hard fact every living creature understood. Their rule spanned over 2,000 star systems, enforced by a fleet of tens of thousands of warships. When the Vorithaeans wanted something, they took it. When they issued a command, you obeyed. That's just how the universe worked. So when they called this big meeting the Galactic Council, everyone knew it wasn't for a friendly chat. With 47 species gathered on a space station, it was just a fancy stage for the Vorithaeans to make their demands. Sure, they'd let everyone talk, but the vote at the end was always a foregone conclusion. Any planet that got a little too brave found itself choked by sanctions or blockades, or worse. The guy in charge, High Chancellor Vexith, was someone out of a nightmare. His species looked a bit like us, but with skin the color of dark stone and eyes that held a faint, unnerving red glow. His voice was a low rumble, the sound of a distant, approaching storm. Vexith's chair was the biggest in the room, set on a platform that literally put him above everyone else. It wasn't an official rule, but nobody was dumb enough to complain. And on this day, he had gathered them all for a very special announcement. The other representatives fidgeted in their seats, a nervous silence hanging in the massive chamber. Some whispered to their neighbors, while others just stared forward, trying to look bored. But you could feel the tension in the air. They all had a sinking feeling they knew what was coming. The Vorithaeans had found themselves a new toy. Distinguished members, Vexith's voice echoed, no microphone needed. The Empire has discovered something new, a find that will enrich all of us under our protection. Our scouts have mapped a new world out on the edge of the galaxy. We call it Sol 3, but its primitive locals have a different name for it, Earth. A few of the representatives stirred, leaning forward just slightly. A new world meant fresh resources, a new workforce, and another mountain of wealth for the Empire. Of course, if you were a very good, very obedient species, you might get a few scraps from their table. Our first scans, Vexith continued, show a world rich with minerals and life, but more importantly, it's home to a species calling themselves humans. Our intelligence team just finished their report, and honestly, what they found is, well, it's adorable. He waved a hand, and a giant hologram shimmered to life in the middle of the hall. It showed a beautiful blue and green planet with swirling white clouds. Then, the image zoomed in, showing cities, roads, and people. As you can see, Vexith said, a smirk spreading across his face, the humans are laughably behind the times. They've only just managed to poke their heads outside their own atmosphere. Their best ships still use chemical combustion. I mean, can you believe it? Chemical combustion. That's like trying to cross an ocean in a canoe. They actually think landing a few of their people on their own moon is some kind of legendary achievement. A few of the representatives managed a weak, nervous chuckle. Chemical rockets were ancient technology, the kind of thing you'd see in a museum. It was like discovering a lost tribe that was still amazed by fire. And get this, Vexith added, the humans don't even have a single world government. They're split into almost 200 little tribes, and most of them are busy fighting each other over patches of dirt and shiny pebbles. Their most powerful weapons are these primitive atom splitters they call nuclear bombs. I guess they're good for blowing up their own cities, but they're completely useless against a modern energy shield. More pictures flashed across the hologram, crowded human cities and tiny, fragile-looking spaceships. To the powerful beings in that room, humanity looked like a bunch of toddlers playing in a sandbox. Therefore, the Empire has decided, Vexith declared, his voice turning cold as ice, that Sol 3 and its entire solar system will be claimed as our territory. The humans will be given one chance to surrender and serve the Empire. If they refuse, we'll move forward with a routine military cleanup. Fleet Admiral Kreth has been put in charge of the 7th Subjugation Fleet for this job. A hologram of the Admiral appeared next to the image of Earth. Kreth looked even scarier than Vexith, his armor covered in metals from centuries of crushing rebellions. His red eyes burned with the fire of a genetically engineered warrior. Kreth had personally brought 9 different species to their knees. He had never failed. The Seventh Fleet consists of 847 warships, Vexith said calmly. That includes 6 dreadnoughts, 42 battleships, 150 cruisers, and all the support ships we need. Now, normally, for a planet that hasn't even figured out faster-than-light travel, we'd send about 100 ships. But Admiral Kreth asked for the extra firepower to make a lasting impression. We want the humans to understand right away that fighting back isn't even an option. The representative from Thaxia, a small insect-like creature, timidly raised a claw. High Chancellor, if I may, is a fleet that large really necessary for a species at this level? It seems a little much. Vexith's glowing red eyes snapped to the Thaxian, who immediately lowered its arm. This isn't about what's necessary, Delegate, Vexith growled. This is about sending a message to everyone. The Empire's power is absolute. Our resources are endless. We can send almost 1,000 warships to deal with one tiny, insignificant planet because we have tens of thousands more waiting. Let this be a lesson to all of you. The Thaxian representative practically melted into its chair. The message was perfectly clear. The Vorithians could crush anyone with overwhelming force, even an opponent that was no threat at all. The operation will begin in 3 standard weeks, Vexith said. The Seventh Fleet is gathering at Staging Point Gamma. Admiral Kreth expects the whole thing to be over in less than one of their Earth days. The humans will look up and see their sky filled with our ships. They'll get our terms. They will surrender. If they're stupid enough to fight back, their entire military will be wiped out in a few hours. After that, we'll begin our standard integration protocols. And everyone in that room knew exactly what standard integration protocols really meant. The humans would have all their weapons taken away. Their planet would be stripped of every last valuable resource. Their people would become cheap labor for the Empire's massive projects. Their culture would be allowed to exist only if it didn't get in the way of their new masters. In just 1 generation, Earth would become just another cog in the Imperial machine. Its people just another nameless, faceless workforce serving the Empire. This meeting is over, Vexith announced. You will all be sent a live feed of the mission. The Admiral has kindly agreed to stream the entire event so the whole galaxy can see how efficient the Vorithians are. I expect every one of you to watch, and to make sure your homeworlds are watching too. Let it be a reminder of our strength and of how unbelievably stupid it is to defy us. And with that, Vexith turned and walked out, leaving the representatives sitting in a thick, heavy silence. One by one, they got up and filed out, heading back to their rooms to share the news. In a quiet hallway, the Thaxian delegate hurried to catch up with the representative from Draxus, a giant wolf-like creature covered in fur. "Do you think they have any clue?" the Thaxian whispered. "The humans, do they have any idea what's about to hit them?" The huge Draxian shook his head. How could they? They're still not even sure if anyone else is out there. For years, they've been shooting radio signals into space, hoping someone would answer. Well, an answer is coming, and it's the worst one they could possibly imagine. "I almost feel bad for them," the Thaxian said quietly. "I've listened to some of their old broadcasts. They sound so hopeful. They talk about peace and different species working together for the greater good." "Then they're naive," the Draxian grumbled, though his voice had a hint of sadness. "The galaxy isn't some happy family. It's a food chain. The Vorithians are at the top, and the rest of us just try not to get eaten. That's the hard truth. The humans are about to get a very rough lesson in how the universe really works." "Well, at least they might survive," the Thaxian said, trying to find a silver lining. "The Vorithians usually don't wipe out a species if they surrender right away. If the humans are smart, they'll just get on their knees." "You could argue that," the Draxian delegate grumbled, "but I've been reading up on their history. These humans, they're a difficult species. They're constantly at war with themselves, yet they possess this baffling, illogical sense of pride. They might just do something monumentally stupid. They might actually try to put up a fight. In that case, they'll be erased from history," the Thaxian replied with a weary sigh. A fleet of 847 Vorathaean battleships going up against chemical rockets and atomic weapons. This wasn't going to be a war. It was going to be pest control. The two representatives went their separate ways. Throughout the station, similar discussions were happening. A handful of aliens felt a brief spark of sympathy for the humans. But the vast majority were just glad the Empire's insatiable appetite was focused on someone else for a change. Have you ever been forced to watch a massive bully corner someone 100 times smaller, knowing if you even breathed a word, you'd be next? That's the exact feeling churning in the stomachs of dozens of alien races as they watched the live feed. They knew speaking out wasn't just a bad idea, it was a guaranteed death sentence. And if you think that's an impossible situation, you need to stick around, because the way this story turns out is something nobody saw coming. Miles above, inside a heavily armored command center reserved for the Vorathaean High Command, High Chancellor Vexith was in a holo conference with Admiral Kreth, whose shimmering giant form dominated the room. "The Council has been informed," Vexith stated. "As per regulations, they will observe." A few of them expressed some token pity for the humans, but not one of them had the spine to vote against the annexation. "As expected," Kreth sneered. "Their fear of us is what keeps the galaxy in order. It's how things should be. Have you reviewed the battle plans I sent over?" "I have. The fleet you've gathered seems excessive." "I approved the extra ships because your reasoning was solid," Vexith clarified. "This entire operation must be a demonstration of absolute spirit-breaking power. Let the whole galaxy tune in and take notes on what happens when a lesser species fails to contribute." Kreth's nod was sharp and full of satisfaction. "The 7th Fleet will arrive in the Sol system in exactly 3 weeks. We'll exit hyperspace right beside their 4th planet, a reddish, dusty world they call Mars. From there, we will broadcast our standard ultimatum in all their primary languages. I've been looking at their technology. They have a primitive global network they call the Internet. We're going to hijack it and broadcast our message on every single screen they possess, all at the same time." Vexith leaned in, his interest piqued. "And what kind of reaction are you anticipating?" "Complete and utter chaos," Kreth said, a cruel grin spreading across his lips. "Their governments will be falling all over themselves trying to respond. It'll be a beautiful mess of finger-pointing and blame. A few might try to puff up their chests, but their military analysts will quickly realize they're hopelessly outmatched. I'll give them 6 hours, tops, before they're begging us to accept their surrender." "And if they refuse?" Vexith prodded. "If they refuse," Kreth went on, "we will begin to systematically vaporize their military bases. A few smoking craters where their airfields used to be should be enough to break their spirit. And if they're still feeling stubborn after that," Kreth's eyes took on a predatory gleam, "then we begin orbital strikes on their population centers. Believe me, the moment we turn one of their precious cities into a cloud of ash, they will fold. Humans are pathetically emotional. Our psychological profiles indicate they would never sacrifice their own people for a war they have 0 chance of winning." "Excellent. Just one thing, Admiral," Vexith cautioned. "The entire galaxy is watching. Make it clean, make it quick, and make it absolutely terrifying. I want every species tuned into this broadcast to be reminded that the Empire is absolute." "You have my word, High Chancellor," Kreth replied with a crisp salute. "The 7th Fleet will bring nothing but glory. As for the humans, they'll be nothing more than a footnote in our history. Just another primitive race that learned their proper place is on their knees before the might of the Vorathaean Empire." The hologram vanished, leaving Vexith alone in the vast silent chamber. He strolled over to a massive viewport, staring out into the star-dusted blackness. Out there, somewhere in that infinite void, the human race was living out its daily life, totally unaware that its entire existence had just been signed away. In just 3 weeks, their world would be shattered. Vexith felt no guilt, not even the slightest hint of it. To him, the galaxy operated on a simple principle: the strong dominate the weak, the intelligent rule the simple. The Empire took what it wanted for the most basic reason of all: because it could. It was the law of the jungle, just scaled up to a cosmic level. The humans were about to receive a very harsh lesson, and the rest of the galaxy would be watching, remembering exactly why no one challenges the Empire. 3 weeks. That was all the time humanity had left. The Vorithaean Seventh Fleet ripped open the fabric of space, spilling out of hyperspace like a tidal wave of darkness. 847 warships blinked into existence near Mars, their jet-black hulls seeming to absorb the light of the distant sun. Every ship was an instrument of death, engineered for one thing: complete and total conquest. Their smallest vessels were the size of a human aircraft carrier. Their largest dreadnought stretched over 5 kilometers long, bristling with enough firepower to crack a planet in half. On the bridge of the flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kreth watched the red sphere of Mars grow on the main view screen as his armada locked into a flawless, intimidating formation. All around him, his officers worked with the quiet, practiced efficiency of a seasoned war machine. The bridge itself felt less like a command center and more like a cathedral dedicated to war, with ceilings soaring 20 meters high and walls alive with flowing streams of tactical data. "Fleet formation locked, Admiral," the tactical officer reported. "All ships report green across the board. The jump was flawless." "Scan the system," Kreth ordered. "I want a full-spectrum analysis. I want to know the location of every human ship, satellite, and stray piece of cosmic garbage. No surprises." The sensor officer's fingers danced across her console, aiming the fleet's powerful sensor arrays at the third planet from the sun. "Scanning now, Admiral. Initial readings show a cloud of artificial satellites around their home world, mostly primitive comms and weather tracking devices. We're also detecting chemical rocket launches from the surface. Looks like routine trips to a very small orbital station. We can confirm 0 military craft outside of their atmosphere." Kreth nodded, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. It was exactly as their intelligence had predicted. The humans had barely waded into the cosmic shallows, with a tiny space station and no real fleet to speak of. They had no defensive patrols, no early warning systems beyond those simple satellites. They were utterly defenseless against any threat coming from beyond their own moon. "Open a channel to the Galactic Council," Kreth commanded, "and broadcast on all public networks. Let the universe bear witness to this historic moment." Across the galaxy, on the Central Council Station, and on the homeworlds of 47 different species, screens flickered to life. Trillions of individuals were now watching the Vorithaean fleet, a silent, dark promise of destruction hanging in space. In the Great Council Chamber, delegates shifted in their seats, steeling themselves for what they knew would be a quick and ugly spectacle. "Channel is live, Admiral," the communications officer confirmed. "Attention, inhabitants of the planet you call Earth," Kreth began, his voice booming as the ship's computers translated it into 17 of Earth's most spoken languages simultaneously. "I am Fleet Admiral Kreth of the Vorithaean Empire. Your world has been selected for annexation. You will cease all military activities and prepare to receive our ground forces. You have 6 hours to broadcast your unconditional surrender. Comply, and your species will be peacefully absorbed into our glorious empire. We will protect you, we will guide you, and we will find a productive purpose for your world. But if you choose to resist, we will bring utter annihilation. You cannot win, you cannot hide. Your only real choice is to decide the manner of your survival. Obey and live, resist and be erased. The clock starts now." The message ended. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, the officers glanced at each other with confident smiles. Their own analysts predicted it would take the humans at least an hour to even process what was happening. They expected a wave of panic transmissions, mass hysteria, and probably a few desperate attempts to beg for more time. The actual reply came in under 2 minutes. It was a single audio broadcast with no video from an entity that identified itself as NORAD Combined Space Command. The voice was a human male, speaking English in an incredibly calm, almost nonchalant tone. "Yeah, that's going to be a no for us. Maintain your current position outside of lunar orbit. If you cross that line, you will be fired upon. This is your first and only warning. NORAD out." For a full 10 seconds, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was completely, utterly silent. Officers just stared at each other in disbelief. And then Admiral Kreth began to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the enormous command center. "Did you just hear that?" he roared, turning to his bridge crew. "They actually threatened us! A species that still uses glorified bottle rockets to reach orbit just issued a threat to the Vorathaean Empire. They warned us!" He let out another booming laugh, louder this time. "I have brought 9 civilizations to their knees. I have personally ordered entire worlds to be turned into glass. And these little bugs think they can shoot at us?" All across the galaxy, the reaction was pure disbelief. In the Galactic Council chamber, delegates shifted nervously in their seats. The Thaxian ambassador leaned toward his Draxian colleague. They said no. In less than 2 minutes, they didn't even bother to hold a meeting. The Draxian whispered back, "They're completely insane, or they have absolutely no clue what they're up against." But on the bridge of the flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kreth's laughter caught in his throat, instantly replaced by a cold, sharp fury. "Communications!" the Admiral snapped. "Send a reply. Tell them they have just made the single biggest mistake of their short, pathetic little lives. We are advancing on their world, and our only terms are their immediate and unconditional surrender. Anything less, and we will turn their planet into a smoking ruin." The communications officer began to say, "Yes, Admiral." But Kreth silenced him with a flick of his wrist. "You know what? Forget that. We're done talking. Words are for equals, not for animals. All ships, full speed ahead towards Earth. Assume bombardment formation. It's time we taught these humans what happens when you defy us." In perfect unison, the colossal fleet began to move. 847 warships surged toward the small blue planet, a flawless, disciplined wave of absolute destruction. The massive dreadnoughts formed the core, shielded by layers of battleships and cruisers, while swift destroyers raced ahead like a screen of hungry sharks. It was the perfect formation for crushing a weaker opponent, a textbook example of shock and awe. "Time until we reach orbital insertion?" Admiral Kreth demanded. "At our current velocity, 43 minutes, sir." "Excellent," he smirked. "Keep all sensors at maximum. If these little humans are stupid enough to launch one of their primitive fireworks at us, I want to see it coming." But in that moment, the sensor officer's voice cut through the calm of the bridge, sharp with panic. "Admiral, contacts everywhere. Hundreds, no, wait, thousands of new signatures are appearing all over the system." "What?" Kreth stormed over to the sensor station. "Where did they come from? Did they use faster-than-light travel? That's impossible. They don't have that technology." The officer, her eyes wide with terror, stammered, "No FTL traces, sir. They were already here. They were hiding. They're dropping some kind of stealth field." "They were all around us, sir. Everywhere. Hiding out in the asteroid belt, lurking near the gas giants, even tucked into orbit around Mars. We had flown right into a trap, and we never even saw it closing." On the main view screen, the tactical map was erupting with new contacts. Small red dots flickered to life, first a few dozen, then hundreds upon hundreds. Each one represented a ship of a completely unknown design, positioned throughout our solar system in what could only be a perfectly planned ambush. Across the galaxy, delegates from other species watched the live feed in stunned silence. The Thaxian representative shot up from his chair. "How is this possible? Our intelligence reported they didn't have a fleet capable of deep space flight." Kreth could only stare, his mind racing to make sense of it all. Analysis? What in the world are we looking at? What are these ships capable of? The answer sent a shiver of ice down his spine. "Unknown, Admiral, unknown. They're not in any of our databases. Their energy signatures are completely alien. They don't match any known propulsion system. It appears to be some kind of reaction drive, but the power output is off the charts, far beyond what a pre-light speed civilization should be capable of. Sir, They're running cold, with almost no heat signature. That's how they managed to slip past our long-range scans completely. "Give me a ship count, now!" Kreth demanded. "We're still counting, sir. The number is climbing to 437 contacts. Wait, it's now 612. Sir, more are dropping their cloaking fields by the second. 600 ships against their 800. The odds were still in their favor, but this was a far cry from the easy victory they had been promised. These humans weren't some backwater species just learning to walk among the stars. They had been waiting. They had been preparing. "Sir, we're getting a transmission from Earth," the communications officer announced. "On screen," Kreth commanded. The same cold, robotic voice they'd heard before from NORAD echoed across the bridge. "Voratheon fleet, you were warned to maintain your position outside of lunar orbit. You have now breached our defensive perimeter. You will immediately withdraw to a position beyond the orbit of Mars, or we will open fire. You have 60 seconds to comply." Kreth's hands clenched into tight fists. Withdraw? They dare order us to retreat? Lock every weapon on the nearest human ship. All vessels, get ready to fire on my command. We are about to give these upstarts a lesson in what happens when you threaten the Empire. The tactical officer spoke up, his voice cautious. "Admiral, with all due respect, I strongly advise caution. We have no idea what their capabilities are. Maybe we should—" "Silence!" Kreth roared. "We are the Vorathean Empire. We do not show caution to primitives. We do not back down. All ships target the human fleet and fire at will." The Vorathean fleet unleashed a storm of fire. A blinding tempest of energy weapons lit up the blackness of space as thousands of plasma bolts screamed towards the human ships. It was the kind of overwhelming power that could crack planets and turn entire armadas to dust. But the human ships just moved. They didn't glide or bank like normal spaceships. They moved in short, violent, unpredictable bursts, their engines firing in sharp, jarring patterns. The Vorathean targeting systems, designed to track the smooth, predictable arcs of traditional warships, couldn't get a solid lock. 90% of their shots blasted harmlessly into empty space. The few that did hit their targets slammed into the human ships, causing their shields to flare up. But these weren't energy shields like the Voratheans used. It was something else entirely. It looked like layers of armor that literally boiled away under the impact, sacrificing an outer layer to protect the ship's core. It was a brutal, almost primitive-looking defense, but it was working. "They're breaking formation, sir," the tactical officer reported, his voice tight. "They're flying completely erratically. Our targeting computers can't keep up." And then the humans fired back. The first shot came from a ship that had been hiding in the shadow of Mars. It wasn't a laser or a plasma bolt. It was something far simpler and 1,000 times more terrifying. It was a solid piece of metal launched by electromagnetic rails at 30% of the speed of light. A kinetic kill vehicle, just a dense slug of metal moving at an unbelievable speed. It hit the lead dreadnought, the glorious conquest, right in the center. The ship's shields, designed to deflect energy, were completely useless against a solid object moving that fast. The projectile punched through the shields like they were made of soap bubbles. It tore through 2 kilometers of armored plating, ripped through deck after deck, and slammed directly into the ship's reactor core. The glorious conquest simply ceased to exist. Its reactor went critical, erupting in a silent, brilliant flash of light so bright it could be seen from Earth. 5,000 Vorathean soldiers were vaporized in an instant. The shockwave from the explosion crippled 2 nearby cruisers. On the Galactic Council station, the delegates stared at their screens in absolute shock. The Draxian delegate whispered, "They took out a dreadnought in a single shot. How?" But the humans gave them no time to figure it out. More kinetic slugs screamed in from hidden positions all across the solar system. They were cheap, simple chunks of metal, but at those speeds, they were unstoppable. Vorathean shields were useless. Vorathean armor might as well have been made of paper. Ships that had conquered entire star systems were being torn to shreds by weapons the rest of the galaxy would have considered a joke. "Evasive maneuvers," Kreth screamed, his voice cracking. "All ships scatter! Break formation! We have to dodge these things!" But the humans had planned for that too. As the Vorithaean fleet broke apart in total chaos, the human ships surged forward, closing the distance. And once they got close, they unleashed a completely new arsenal. Missiles that could change direction on a dime, seemingly defying the laws of physics. Warheads carrying nuclear payloads that detonated directly on top of Vorithaean hulls. And lasers, powered by contained atomic explosions that sliced through armor plating in close-quarters dogfights. "They're all over us," the sensor officer yelled. "Sir, they're using the wreckage of our own ships as cover. They're hiding in the debris fields and ambushing us." Kreth could only watch in pure terror as his magnificent fleet was taken apart piece by bloody piece. The humans fought like nothing he had ever encountered. They had no honor, no formations, no tactics he could possibly predict. They hit us from impossible angles, using ghost signals and electronic smokescreens to create chaos. They even threw their own smaller ships into our line of fire, sacrificing them just so their heavy hitters could get a clean shot. "Signal a retreat," Admiral Kreth finally managed to say, his voice cracking under the strain. "All squadrons, pull back to Mars orbit. We need to reform and—" "Sir, the humans are jamming our hyperspace drives. They're blocking our escape." "What? That's impossible. That technology is beyond them." "It shouldn't be, sir, but we can't jump. Any ship that tries is just getting a cascade of critical error warnings." In that single, stomach-turning moment, Admiral Kreth finally got it. The humans had been watching. They'd reverse-engineered Vorithaean tech, picked apart their communications, and built an entire war machine designed to exploit every last one of their vulnerabilities. They were trapped, stuck in a star system with an enemy they had written off as nothing more than primitives. The engagement spiraled into a brutal, horrifyingly methodical slaughter. Across the galaxy, every species that was tuned in watched as their entire understanding of humanity was ripped to shreds with each passing moment. This was timestamp 0. The once mighty Vorithaean fleet, now just a frantic scramble of burning ships, was desperately trying to pull together some kind of defensive perimeter. Admiral Kreth's commands were a frantic scream across all frequencies, pleading with his captains to fall back into standard formations. But their standard playbook was completely worthless. The humans had been doing their homework for 40 years. They had analyzed every public broadcast of every single victory the Empire had ever celebrated. It was meant to be an easy win, but Admiral Kreth was completely blindsided. The second his fleet dropped out of hyperspace, it felt like the entire human solar system woke up and decided on violence. Ships hidden for decades among the asteroids roared to life, charging headfirst into the fight. What they'd dismissed as defunct satellites around Jupiter suddenly lit up, revealing themselves as colossal railgun platforms. Even Saturn's rings weren't safe, as camouflaged vessels shed their icy disguises to join the ambush. The humans hadn't just armed their planet, they had turned their whole solar system into a massive kill box, and the Vorithaeans had just politely knocked and walked right in. At the 247-second mark, the battleship Pride of Empire finally landed a solid punch, vaporizing a human frigate with a blast of plasma. The small ship vanished, its crew of 200 souls snuffed out in the void. For a split second, Kreth felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could still turn this around. On paper, this was supposed to be a curb stop. The Vorithaean fleet was larger, better armed, and technologically light years ahead. The humans were seen as little more than annoying insects, staging a desperate, suicidal surprise attack. At least, that's what the Empire believed. But then, 6 human destroyers seemed to phase into existence right out of the fireball of their own destroyed frigate. The horrifying truth clicked into place a second too late. The ship hadn't been a loss. It was a lure. They had dangled it out there, forcing the Pride of Empire to fire its main cannon and give away its precise location. The second it did, human targeting computers got a lock. The 6 destroyers fired in perfect unison, not with energy weapons, but with a tidal wave of missiles. We're talking dozens from each ship, a swarm of over 100 warheads all streaking toward one target. The Pride of Empire's point defense cannons painted the darkness with light, but they never had a prayer. A series of silent nuclear blossoms bloomed against the battleship's shields, cracking them open before chewing through the hull like it was made of foil. The very last missile of the volley slipped through the carnage and buried itself deep inside the ship's reactor core. The Pride of Empire didn't even explode. It just winked out of existence in a flash of blinding white light, taking its 4 escort cruisers with it in the blast wave. The smaller ships were sent tumbling into the black, silent, and dead. Billions of light years away, the races that had lived in fear of the Vorithaean Empire watched the broadcast, torn between sheer terror and a dark sense of satisfaction. The Taxian delegate gripped his console with all 4 hands, his eyes wide. The Draxian sitting next to him was trembling. "They're using strategies we couldn't even imagine," he whispered. The Draxian observer just couldn't process what he was seeing. "How are they pulling this off?" he stammered. "Every ship is acting independently, but they move as one. There's no flagship coordinating the attack, no single commander to target. It's like they're all connected." He was exactly right. What looked like utter chaos to the aliens was actually a perfectly conducted symphony of annihilation. Every single human ship, weapon, and sensor was linked into one gigantic shared combat network. They were experiencing the battle through a million sets of eyes at once, their computers crunching the data as a single consciousness, systematically taking the enemy fleet apart piece by piece. It was a hive mind of circuits and steel, a superorganism built for war. At the 512-second mark, the cold, hard reality finally slammed into Admiral Kreth. He wasn't fighting some disorganized planetary defense force. He was fighting an enemy that had been preparing for this single moment for generations. Every weapon they used was perfectly designed to counter a known flaw in Vorithaean engineering. Every tactic they employed was a direct counter to a strategy he thought was a closely guarded secret. "All ships disengage!" Kreth's voice, once a commanding roar, was now a strangled gasp of pure panic. "Fall back to Mars and spool up the hyperspace drives!" His fleet frantically tried to comply, ships turning and burning for open space. But you can't just blink into hyperspace. The ship's navigation computer needs a full 30 seconds to calculate a safe path. 30 seconds to plot a route that doesn't accidentally fly you into the heart of a star. 30 seconds where you are forced to fly in a perfectly straight, utterly predictable line for the jump drive to engage. And the humans knew it. The Vorithaeans had bragged about their rapid jump technology on galactic news networks for decades. The humans didn't just see the commercials. They built their entire combat doctrine around that one tiny 30-second window of absolute vulnerability. The moment any Vorithaean ship leveled out for its jump, a fresh storm of human missiles would scream toward it. Every single vessel that tried to flee instantly became the top priority target. Kinetic slugs, nuclear warheads, and pinpoint lasers hammered the helpless ships, turning them into expanding clouds of debris or sending them spinning uncontrollably into the endless dark. "We can't escape and we can't fight back!" the tactical officer shrieked, his military discipline completely gone. "Sir, they're just taking us apart. We've lost 43 ships in the last minute alone." All Admiral Kreth could do was watch his tactical display as the red icons representing his warships vanished one by one. This was supposed to be a demonstration of power, a quick and painless conquest. This was an execution. At the 833-second mark, the Vorithaean cruiser, Infinite Victory, managed to score a clean hit, vaporizing a human frigate that had pushed its luck. A dark, vicious smile touched the lips of its captain, Threxus. Finally, they could still fight. That brief moment of triumph lasted for exactly 4 seconds. 6 human destroyers that had been feigning a retreat suddenly whipped around and went on the attack. They had sacrificed yet another of their own ships as bait, a tactic that, unbelievably, was still working. The humans just didn't seem to value their ships the same way the Vorithaeans did. To them, a ship was just a platform, a bullet to be spent if it meant taking a more valuable enemy piece off the board. It was a cold, brutal calculus that was completely foreign to the Voratheians, whose entire culture was built on the honor and glory of their magnificent warships. The destroyers opened fire at point-blank range. The Infinite Victory and its 3 escorts were torn to ribbons from all sides at once. Their shields collapsed, their armor boiled away, and their reactors went critical. In under 60 seconds, 4 more Voratheian capital ships were gone, their flaming hulks joining the massive, growing debris field that was now orbiting Earth. Across the galaxy, the alien races watching the live feed were finally starting to understand. This wasn't just a battle. This was a statement. Humanity was teaching a lesson. Having the biggest fleet in the galaxy means nothing if you lack the strategy or the will to use it properly. The Voratheians had bigger ships, but the humans had a smarter plan, superior coordination, and a frankly horrifying willingness to trade blood for ground. Then, at the 1,109-second mark, Admiral Kreth's own flagship, the Eternal Dominion, took a direct hit to the command bridge. A kinetic slug, fired from a human dreadnought, struck the vessel precisely where human intelligence predicted the Admiral would be standing. The projectile, moving at a blistering fraction of light speed, punched through 30 meters of reinforced armor before its tactical nuclear payload detonated deep within the command center. Admiral Kreth had just enough time to process his own failure. He saw the ceiling peel back like tinfoil. He saw his command crew tossed around the room like rag dolls. He saw fire erupt from every console as the main view screen cracked, sucking the air from his lungs. His final words, broadcast on an open channel for the entire galaxy to hear, were a choked scream of pure, unadulterated rage. "How? You savages!" And then the reactor core of the Eternal Dominion breached. It was the flagship that had put down 9 rebellions and burned entire worlds to glass. They called it unbeatable. And then it snapped into 3 massive pieces, dissolving into a cloud of wreckage. Admiral Kreth and his crew of 12,000 souls were just gone. The flagship's destruction sent the entire Voratheian fleet into a panicked tailspin. With no one in command, it was pure chaos. Some ships fought back, others tried to run, and a few just shut down their weapons, begging for mercy. The humans answered their pleas with more cannon fire. This wasn't a war for territory. This was pest control. And every last Voratheian ship was on the list. The human fleet wasn't stopping until every one of those ships was a cold, silent tomb drifting in space. There would be no prisoners, no survivors to carry the tale back home, and no witnesses except for the stunned alien races watching from light years away. At the 1,322-second mark, a single Voratheian scout ship, the Swift Messenger, managed to break through the mayhem. Her captain was a young officer named Keyleth, and he was piloting the fastest vessel in their entire armada. Scout ships were made for running, not fighting. Keyleth slammed the engines into the red, pushing them far past their safety limits as he burned for the edge of the solar system. All he had to do was clear the sun's gravity well to make a clean jump to hyperspace. He was so close. He was actually going to make it out alive. The human fleet was bogged down, busy tearing apart the larger warships. They were too far and too occupied to give chase. Just a few more minutes and he'd be home free. He would be the one to warn the Empire that humanity wasn't some soft target. They were a sleeping giant that had just been woken up. He would tell them this whole invasion was a catastrophic mistake, and that everything they thought they knew about these so-called primitives was dead wrong. And that's when a lone human ship blinked onto his sensors. It was accelerating from behind Saturn's moons at a speed that shouldn't be possible. No ship could move that fast. The G-forces alone would have turned any living crew into jelly. It was pulling off maneuvers that would tear a normal vessel apart at the seams. For 300 years, the Voratheian Empire had been the biggest bully in the galaxy, and they'd decided Earth was their next piece of cake. But in the last terrifying seconds of his life, a pilot named Keyleth understood they had made a fatal error. The ship hunting him wasn't being flown by a person. It was an AI-piloted drone. and it moved in ways no biological being could ever survive. At 1358, it didn't fire a laser. It just rammed his scout ship, vaporizing them both in a flash of light. But right before the end, Keyleth managed to get one last message out. It was a desperate scream for help, broadcast on an emergency channel, a warning that would take years to crawl its way back to the Empire. And it was terrifyingly simple. Earth is not what we thought. They were ready for us. They were waiting. The fleet is gone. For the love of the Empire, do not come here. Just 2 minutes later, at 1400 hours, the last Vorathian ship, a crippled destroyer hiding behind Mars, was erased from existence by a wave of missiles. The captain never even got the chance to say, "We surrender." Human computers simply ran the numbers, calculated that the damaged ship posed a potential escape risk, and ordered its destruction. And just like that, the war was over. 4 hours ago, 847 Vorathian warships had arrogantly entered our solar system. Now, all that remained was floating scrap. The human fleet lost 63 ships, but every single one was a calculated sacrifice, like trading a pawn to capture a queen. The final score was unbelievable, a kill ratio of over 13-1. In the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, delegates from 1,000 worlds could only stare at their screens in shocked silence. The Vorathian delegate was frozen, his eyes wide and vacant. Imagine being the toughest kid on the playground for 3 centuries, only to be knocked out cold by the quiet new kid in a single punch. A Thaxian delegate finally broke the silence, his voice a dry whisper. The Vorathian Empire. They've ruled for 300 years. They have crushed 17 civilizations and never lost a major battle. And a species we all dismissed as primitives just wiped out their entire navy in 14 minutes. A grim-faced Draxian turned to him. "You're mistaken," he said quietly. "This didn't take 14 minutes. This started 40 years ago, the instant humanity first detected our radio signals. They've been preparing ever since." They had built their entire military in secret, trained their soldiers in the void, and turned their whole solar system into one giant, hidden death trap. And then they simply waited, letting the rest of the galaxy believe they were harmless. Suddenly, a new message flashed across every screen in the chamber. The face of a human woman appeared, her words instantly translated for all to understand. Her message was simple, and it sent a cold dread through every single person in that room. "This is Representative Chen," she said. "As of today, Earth is closed. Any vessel entering our system will be destroyed. There will be no warnings. There will be no negotiations. Stay out of our home, and we will stay out of yours. But if you come looking for a fight, you will share the same fate as the Vorathians. This is your first and only warning." The message ended, plunging the galaxy into a deafening silence that was filled with a terrifying new reality. Humanity hadn't just joined the galactic community with a polite knock. They had kicked the door off its hinges. The council chamber was more crowded than it had ever been. Everyone was asking the same thing: what just happened? But the question that truly hung in the air was, are we next? High Chancellor Vexith stood, but his usual commanding aura was gone. He looked terrified. "The Council recognizes the human delegation," he announced, his voice thin. "We are here to demand an explanation for the events in the Sol system." In the center of the hall, a life-sized hologram of Representative Chen materialized. She wore a plain, dark blue uniform, bare of any medals. She was a small woman with short hair and an expression that was impossible to read. She had the quiet confidence of someone holding a royal flush. "High Chancellor," Chen began, her voice perfectly level. "You say we owe you an explanation. I disagree. We don't owe you a thing. However, to prevent any future misunderstandings, I will provide one." The Thaxian counselor, picking his words with extreme care, asked the question burning in everyone's mind. "Representative, our intelligence indicated your people were centuries away from faster-than-light travel. You had no energy shields, no plasma cannons. How did you defeat a fleet that had all of that and more? Chen actually smiled, but it was a cold, sharp gesture. Counselor, your question reveals the fundamental mistake you all made about us. You scanned our toys and thought you knew our capabilities. You saw chemical rockets and nuclear fission and wrote us off as toddlers playing with blocks. You were wrong. A timeline appeared beside her hologram. 40 years ago, our radio telescopes picked up your transmissions. We heard the Vorithians boasting about their conquests and planning their raids. We learned two things that day. First, that we were not alone in the universe, and second, that our cosmic neighborhood was run by a gang of thugs who exterminated new species like ours for sport. A wave of unease rippled through the chamber. Many of the delegates present had voted to approve those very Vorithian pacification campaigns. Chen continued, so for the first time in human history, every nation on our planet came to a single, unanimous agreement. We would not be their next victim. We would prepare for the day the Vorithians showed up at our door. You spent 40 years preparing for a single engagement? A Draxian general asked, his voice filled with disbelief. How do you possibly keep a secret of that magnitude? It was simple, Chen replied. We went dark. We cut off all deep space transmissions. No more friendly greetings sent out into the black. To the rest of you, we appeared to be exactly what you assumed, a primitive planet, blissfully unaware. You had no clue what we were building in the shadows. The hologram shifted, revealing massive shipyards carved into asteroids and sprawling military bases on the far side of the moon. We dedicated 15% of our planet's entire economic output to a single defense project. We constructed our fleets where your sensors would only register rock and ice. We trained generations of soldiers for a war we hoped would never come. And we designed every single component to be utterly invisible to you. But your technology, Vexith blurted out, his voice cracking. Your weapons were just metal slugs. That's ancient tech. They shouldn't have been able to even scratch our shields. Chen's gaze shifted to the broken Vorithian delegate. We studied you, High Chancellor. For 40 years we listened. We analyzed every battle you ever fought. Your ship schematics, your shield frequencies, your armor composition, your tactical doctrines. You were so arrogant in your power that you broadcast all of your secrets for the entire galaxy to hear. She let that sink in. You literally handed us the instruction manual on how to defeat you. Your shields are designed to stop energy weapons, but they offer little resistance to a solid chunk of metal traveling at 1/3 the speed of light. Your armor can withstand plasma, but it shatters like glass against a massive kinetic impact. We didn't play your game. We created the perfect counter to it. The Thaxian counselor spoke again, his voice now trembling. You said kinetic weapons. To accelerate an object to 30% of light speed, the energy required would be astronomical. How did you do it? Your ships didn't even have advanced shields to protect them from the blast. We don't use shields like yours, Chen answered, her voice steady. We use something we call ablative armor. It's crude, cheap, and brutally effective. When your plasma cannons hit our ships, the outer layers just boil away, absorbing the energy and protecting what's underneath. It's that simple. A lot of our technology is simple, Counselor. That's its strength. It's reliable, easy to mass produce, and doesn't require any rare materials. On the screen, a human warship appeared. It was an ugly, blocky thing, clearly built for a fight, not a parade. Our ships are stubborn. They're built with layers of redundant systems. You knock one offline, 3 more are ready to take its place. If a part breaks, you can slap a new one in seconds. I know they aren't as sleek or elegant as your starships, but they get the job done. And while you were all polishing your chrome, we were building thousands of them. A ripple of shock went through the chamber. It was as if a switch had been flipped. An entire species, pushed to the brink, had secretly turned their whole planet into a weapons factory, and none of the great galactic powers had a clue. A delegate from a small race called the Yark stood up, his voice trembling. Representative Chen, your tactics were barbaric. You used your own ships as bait. You sent your own people on suicide missions just to take down one of our dreadnoughts. You offered no surrender and took no prisoners. Is that just how your species wages war? Chen's expression was carved from stone, completely unreadable. Yes, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. When we fight to win. We don't care about glory or what you call honor. We fight so we can wake up and see the sunrise tomorrow. Every single pilot who got into a cockpit for that battle knew it was likely a one-way trip. They volunteered anyway because they knew exactly what was at stake. If the Vorathayans had won, Earth would just be another slave colony. Our kids and their kids would have been born in chains. We made a choice. We'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the delegates from worlds that had already surrendered to the Empire. I'm sure some of you see us as monsters, but consider this. We gave Admiral Kreth a way out. We told him to turn his fleet around, but he just barreled forward, completely convinced of his own superiority. He looked at us like we were primitives who'd just roll over for him. He was wrong, and his entire fleet paid the price for his arrogance. The Draxian observer leaned forward, his voice a low growl. But your stealth technology? How in the galaxy did you hide thousands of ships from their deep space sensors? Chen's answer was shockingly simple. Basic physics. We engineered our ships to run cold with almost zero emissions. We used passive sensors until the very last second. We hid our fleet where your scanners would never think to look twice. Inside the asteroid belt, among the rings of Saturn, even on the dark side of our own moon, we were hiding in plain sight the entire time, looking like nothing more than space junk. You were searching for powerful warships, with shields flaring and weapons glowing, she went on, a faint, chilling smile touching her lips. You weren't looking for quiet, patient predators waiting for the perfect moment to strike. You thought your advanced technology made you invincible, but we had patience and a plan. We spent 40 years doing nothing but watching you, learning your every move. We became the galaxy's top experts on Vorathayan military strategy without ever firing a single shot. By the time the first missile launched, we already knew how you were going to react before you did. The High Chancellor Vexith's red eyes blazed with a fury he could barely contain. You call it self-defense, but you annihilated an entire armada. 12,000 Vorathayan soldiers lost their lives in that battle, he spat, and their only crime was following orders to expand the glorious empire. Chen turned to him, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. Their crime was trying to conquer our home. High Chancellor, they showed up on our doorstep with 800 warships and gave us two options, surrender or die. They promised they would turn our cities to glass if we fought back. What did you honestly expect us to do? Welcome them with open arms? Thank them for the privilege of becoming your slaves? A thick, heavy silence fell over the great hall. Vexith was stunned into silence. Chen pressed her advantage, her voice tight with rage. And let's be crystal clear about something else. For 40 years, we've monitored your Galactic Council broadcasts. We listened to all 47 of you debate the Vorathayan expansion. We heard you politely call them subjugation operations. We watched you vote to officially recognize conquered planets as part of your empire. And not once, not a single time did any of you object. Not one of you ever had the courage to stand up and say that maybe, just maybe, the Vorathayans should be stopped. Her eyes swept the chamber again, and one by one, the delegates looked down, unable to meet her gaze. You all knew exactly what the Empire was. You watched them swallow world after world, and you did nothing. You were too scared, too weak, or maybe just too comfortable to risk doing the right thing. So don't you dare stand there and lecture me about the lives we had to take to defend our own freedom. You had 40 years to build something better than this. You simply chose to live on your knees instead. The Thaxian counselor finally spoke, his voice barely audible. You are not wrong, Representative Chen. We should have done more. We should have resisted, but the Vorathayan Empire was just too powerful. None of us could have stood against them alone. Then you should have stood against them together, Chen shot back, her tone sharp as shattered glass. There are 47 species on this council, billions of people on thousands of worlds. If you had united against them 3 centuries ago, the Empire never would have become the monster it is today. But you didn't. You chose the quiet life of a servant over a freedom that was worth fighting for. She let her words hang in the air before her voice changed, becoming calm and absolute. Earth will not make your mistake. We are not joining your council. We want no part of your politics. We will never again put our survival in the hands of others. Effective immediately, we are claiming our solar system and a 50 light-year buffer zone around it. Any ship that crosses that border without our direct permission will be considered hostile and will be destroyed. There will be no warnings. There will be no second chances. 50 light years, Vexith sputtered, his face a mask of disbelief. That space covers 17 star systems. You can't possibly defend a territory that huge. For the first time, a genuine, almost mocking smile touched Chen's lips. Can't we, High Chancellor? You also thought we couldn't defend one little planet. You thought 800 warships would be more than enough to crush us. So tell me, how did that work out for you? She pulled the star map up again, where a massive red sphere now marked the new human territory. For 40 years, all you ever detected in our system were primitive chemical rockets. You never saw the orbital shipyards. You never found the hidden weapon platforms. You never once imagined we were preparing for total war. What makes you so sure you know what we've been building in the star systems right next door? A cold dread washed over the chamber. If the humans had built a secret war machine in their own system for 40 years, what could they have built in the surrounding systems that no one ever visited? How deep did this rabbit hole go? We have automated defense platforms deployed across the entire exclusion zone, Chen said plainly. They've been sitting there, silent and waiting, for the last 20 years. You never saw them because you weren't looking. These platforms have one simple job: eliminate any unauthorized vessel. They don't negotiate. They don't give warnings. They just remove the threat. She dismissed the map and looked at the stunned delegates one last time. Humanity is now formally withdrawing from all galactic affairs. We don't want your trade deals. We don't want your alliances. We don't want your politics. We just want to be left alone. Stay out of our space, and we'll stay out of yours. Cross that line, and you will end up just like the Vorathayans. But what if we need your help? A small voice called out. It was the delegate from Plinix, a world the Vorathayans had conquered 200 years ago. What if new empires rise from the ashes? Now that the empire is broken, will you help us? Chen looked at the Plinix delegate, and for a brief moment, something like regret flickered in her eyes. No. Earth's policy is isolation. We will not be dragged into your wars. We are not your saviors. You have to save yourselves, build your own fleets, form your own alliances, create the peaceful galaxy you always claimed you wanted, but do it on your own. Her tone softened just a bit. I'm sorry, but humanity learned a hard lesson. We can't trust anyone else for our protection. We can't rely on treaties or councils. The only security that matters is the strength you build for yourself. And for that reason, Earth is closed. The last thing the galaxy's leaders ever saw of a human was the shimmering image of Representative Chen. Her voice was steady, but it carried a chill that froze the entire council chamber. This is the first and final message humanity will ever send you, she stated. Don't call us. Don't send your diplomats. And for your own good, do not even think about crossing into our exclusion zone. We have nothing more to say. Just remember what happened to the Vorathian 7th Fleet and stay away. Then, her hologram vanished, leaving the most powerful people in the galaxy in a state of shocked, terrified silence. It had only been 6 months since the 14-minute war, an event that didn't just win a battle, it completely broke the galaxy. The Vorathian Empire, the undisputed masters of space for 300 years, were utterly and completely shattered. Can you even imagine being forced to live on your knees for 140 years, only for someone to finally tell you it's okay to stand up? That's what it felt like the day the Vorathian Empire's iron grip on the galaxy was broken. The second their legendary 7th Fleet was vaporized into cosmic dust, their entire corrupt system began to fall apart, and the very first world to rise up was ours, Draxus. For generations, they had tried everything to extinguish our warrior spirit, but they never could. The moment we got the news, we, firmly, escorted their officials to the nearest airlock and proudly declared ourselves a free planet. We had kept the blueprints for our old starships hidden for more than a century, waiting for a day just like this. And right then, a revolution was born. Thaxia, Plen, Yalen, a dozen other worlds saw what we did and followed, their cries for freedom joining ours. On some worlds, the occupying forces just packed up and vanished in the night. On others, the local Varathian garrisons made a last, desperate stand, refusing to believe their empire was gone. The Empire tried to regain control, of course. They sent what few ships they had left to put down the rebellions, but it was like trying to plug 1,000 leaks in a dam with just your fingers. Their military was stretched so thin it was pathetic. In just 3 months, they lost half of all their territory. The planets that actually stayed loyal immediately started fighting each other, as every power-hungry commander suddenly decided he was the new emperor. The same species that had conquered 17 different civilizations was now tearing itself apart from the inside. And the Galactic Council? They turned into a total laughingstock. They were already a joke for being completely blindsided by the humans, and this was the last straw. Pretty soon, nobody even bothered showing up for meetings anymore. The massive council station, once a beacon of galactic unity, became a ghost town. The handful of politicians who did come just sat around blaming each other while the galaxy burned. I heard the Thaxian counselor gave an emotional speech once to a room full of nothing but empty chairs. He said, "We have failed. We let the Vorathayans build an empire on fear, and we dared to call it stability. We called it peace, but it was a peace held at the end of a gun. And the second someone stared right down the barrel of that gun and refused to blink," he went on, "the whole fantasy collapsed." A military observer from my homeworld, Draxus, was standing in the back and just gave a slow nod. "It's an arms race now," the observer said under his breath. "Every species is scrambling to build fleets, to figure out what the humans did, desperately trying to unlock the secret to how they broke the most powerful military in history. Everyone's terrified they'll be next on some new conqueror's hit list." The Thaxian just sighed. And who can blame them? The humans taught the galaxy 2 very harsh lessons. A huge fleet means nothing without a brilliant strategy, and in the end, the only person you can truly count on is yourself. After humanity delivered that galactic wake-up call, a weird, tense silence fell over everything. Trust was a concept nobody could afford anymore, and absolutely no one trusted the Council. How could they have possibly missed a civilization with that kind of power hiding right under their noses? Our Draxian ambassador had no answers. While the rest of the galaxy spiraled into chaos, the human sector just went dark. They threw up a 50 light-year do not enter sign around their solar system, and nobody was stupid enough to test it. Our best long-range sensors started picking up strange things happening out there. Gigantic structures were being built in orbit around Jupiter. Bizarre energy pulses were coming from Saturn. An entire civilization was buzzing with an incredible amount of activity, but not one single ship ever left their self-imposed territory. The whispers started to fly. Were they building a fleet of massive colony ships to escape the galactic mess? Were they creating planet killers to hold everyone else hostage? Or were they inventing something so new, so unbelievably powerful, that it would make their last victory look like a child's temper tantrum? The most frightening part was that no one had a clue, and nobody was dumb enough to go and ask. Well, almost nobody. A small survey ship from the plant species made that one final mistake. They were out looking for new planets to colonize and drifted a little too close, about 51 light-years from Earth. There was no warning shot, no "you are entering restricted space" message. There was just a silent flicker in the void as hidden defense platforms awoke from their slumber and shredded the ship with railgun fire. All 37 people on that ship were gone in less than a second. The message was crystal clear. Earth was not messing around. Stay out for good. Over on Vexith, one of the last remaining fragments of the old empire, the surviving military leaders were in a full-blown panic. They had lost all communication with 17 of their fleets. Their economy was in a complete nosedive. A vicious civil war was raging through what little they had left. But the one thing that kept them up at night was Earth. "What's to stop them from coming for us?" one commander asked, his voice trembling. "What if they see our weakness and decide to complete the job?" "They won't," Admiral Thraxus sighed. He was one of the few high-ranking officers who survived the political chaos after the 7th Fleet was destroyed. "The humans told us exactly what they want. They want to be left alone. As long as we stay away from them, they couldn't care less about us." "But what happens when the Draxians come for payback?" another commander argued. "Will the humans step in and save us then?" Thraxus let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Save us? Did you not listen to Representative Chen's broadcast? She made it perfectly clear that Earth is staying out of galactic affairs. We are on our own. We dug this hole for ourselves the day we underestimated them, and now we have to lie in it." He brought up a star chart, and a huge red sphere glowed where human territory was marked. That 50-light-year bubble wasn't just a border. It was a declaration of independence from the entire galaxy. "The humans didn't just win a war," Thraxus said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They proved you don't need a complicated network of alliances to be safe. They proved you can stand on your own." And now, every other species was in a mad dash to learn that same difficult lesson. But out in the quiet darkness of space, far away from any spying eyes, a secret meeting was happening. Representatives from 7 different species, including us Draxians, had come together on a cloaked ship. Our own governments had no idea we were there. We called ourselves the Liberation Coalition, and we had a plan to build a better future together. Our delegate spoke first. "We all know why we're here. The Varathian Empire is history. The Galactic Council is a joke, and humanity has taught us that real security comes from strength. The only problem is, we can't all be Earth. We don't have 40 years and a unified planet to get ready for the worst. So we'll do it as a team," the Thaxian representative shot back. "We'll combine our resources, share our technology, and forge a defensive alliance so powerful that no one will ever get the bright idea to build another empire." "But what about the humans?" the Plen delegate asked, his voice shaking with nervousness. "What if they look at our new alliance and see it as a threat?" "Then our actions will prove them wrong," our Draxian said with confidence. "We will demonstrate our respect for their space. No flybys, no spy probes, absolutely nothing. We will make it undeniable that we want the very same thing they do, the freedom to live in peace and shape our own destiny." Over the next few months, the Liberation Coalition quietly started to expand. More worlds joined our cause, sharing ship designs and coordinating their factories. We began to copy human strategies, focusing on smaller, automated defense platforms and tough, simple systems, instead of the overly complicated and delicate tech the Empire loved. We pored over the records of the battle in the Sol system like it was a holy book, trying to reverse engineer every bit of their strategic brilliance. But we did one thing the humans never did. We started to trust each other again. We shared everything, creating an alliance built on cooperation, not on conquest. We were finally becoming the one thing the Galactic Council had only ever pretended to be: a real partnership of equals, working together for mutual defense. At the same time, back on Earth, Representative Chen watched the galactic intelligence feeds scroll across the main screen in the Unified Defense Command Center. "The galaxy is hitting the reset button," her intelligence chief remarked. "The Varathian Empire is officially a thing of the past. Their old territories are tearing themselves apart in civil wars, and about 15 species have formed their own little alliances, Model 1. The biggest one is called the Liberation Coalition, ma'am. They're using our own playbook against anyone they see as a threat." "Good," Chen said, her eyes glued to the holographic map. "Let them. It's time they learned to stand on their own 2 feet. Isn't that what this was all about? A galaxy of free people, not a bunch of planets bowing to a new master." A general shifted nervously beside her. But what if they get too strong? What if they turn the rest of the galaxy against Earth? Chen just smiled. She swiped her hand and a new image filled the screen, a stunning montage of human progress, cities gracefully floating in high orbit, entire asteroids being hollowed out like beehives for their resources, fusion plants turning the moons of Jupiter into miniature suns, and shipyards, bigger than anything the galaxy had ever seen, were birthing the next generation of humanity's guardians. The lesson was for them. The future was for us. "Let them try," she said, her voice as cold and empty as the space between worlds. "We tore apart the Vathaean 7th Fleet in 14 minutes, and that was with ships we designed 40 years ago. Do you honestly believe we've been sitting around doing nothing for the last 6 months? Do you think that was our peak?" She expanded the display, showing off ship designs with impossible engines and weapons that made their legendary war-winning fleet look like museum pieces. "The Vorathayans made a rookie mistake," Chen said bluntly. "They thought the war would be won by whoever had the most expensive toys. But victory never goes to the richest. It goes to the most prepared, the smartest, the ones who just refuse to be beaten. We spent 4 decades getting ready for them. We've spent the last 6 months getting ready for everyone else." A young officer, his voice trembling slightly, dared to ask a question. "Ma'am, with all due respect, some of us are worried we're planning for the wrong future. The galaxy isn't just a battlefield anymore. New alliances are being made, better ways are being found. Maybe we should stop hiding. We could be a part of that." Chen turned to the young man, and for the first time, a little warmth melted the ice in her eyes. "I understand that feeling, I really do. But our policy of staying out of it is there for a very good reason. The second we dive into galactic politics, we paint a giant target on our backs. Every other power will see us as either a weapon they can use or a threat they need to eliminate. We'd be dragged from one war to the next, bleeding for other people's problems." She walked over to the main viewport, looking down at the beautiful blue and green swirl of Earth. "Our own species spent centuries fighting each other over imaginary lines on a map, different gods and patches of dirt. We nearly torched this beautiful home of ours with our own bombs. It took an enemy from the stars to finally get us to work together. That unity is the most precious thing we have, and it's fragile. We can't risk it shattering by getting tangled up in the galaxy's endless wars." "So we do nothing?" the officer asked, his voice now a whisper. "We just stand by while a new empire rises up and crushes them?" "We do much more than nothing," Chen corrected him gently. "We protect our home. We hold on to our strength and our freedom that we paid for in blood. We are living proof that a species can survive in this savage universe by relying on itself. We're leading by example, not by giving orders. You don't have to conquer the galaxy to be safe. You just need the will to build your own walls and the firepower to make sure nobody can ever tear them down." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes tracing the streams of data flowing across the main screen. "Now, look at this," she said, her voice firm. Way out on the edge of the territory they'd claimed, something amazing was happening. 3 brand new alliances had popped up in the last month, built from the rubble of the Vorathaean Empire. Species that had been bitter enemies for generations were now sharing tech and planning joint defenses, figuring out how to stand on their own. "It's working," she whispered. "They're learning." Her head of intelligence wasn't so sure. For now, alliances like that are brittle. What happens when old arguments over a moon or a mining claim flare up again? Chen just shrugged. "Then they'll deal with it. It's not our problem. Earth has everything it needs, the rest is up to them. We now control 17 star systems," she reminded them all, gesturing at the glowing map. "That's more than enough room for us to grow for the next 1,000 years. We have the resources, the territory, and the military power to guarantee our independence. That is the only thing that matters." She could almost feel the doubt rolling off some of them. "I know what you're thinking, that this is selfish. But what's the other option? If we get involved, how long until we're fighting someone else's war? How long until they start looking at our fleet not as our shield, but as their sword? Our founders gave us one clear rule, she continued. We fight for our survival, not to build an empire. We protect what is ours, and what is ours alone. By following that one simple principle, they would never turn into the same monsters they had just defeated. They would never become another galactic bully, forcing their will on others for some twisted idea of peace. As weeks turned into months, the galaxy began to heal itself, without a single ship or order from Earth. A scrappy new liberation coalition grew to include 23 species, becoming a serious power in its own right. The old Vorthaean warlords were too busy fighting each other, bleeding themselves dry. New trade routes buzzed with ships, connecting worlds that had been cut off for centuries. And through it all, Earth was a ghost, completely silent on all galactic channels. No one came in and no one went out. The humans had simply walked off the stage, leaving everyone else to wonder what they were building behind their quiet borders. Some called it the biggest waste in history. With human leadership and technology, a better, fairer galaxy could have been built from the ruins. Others saw it as the ultimate act of wisdom. By refusing to play the great game of empires, humanity could never be corrupted by it. But on one thing, everyone agreed: the galaxy was changed forever. The fall of the Vorthaean Empire proved that no one was invincible. Earth's shocking victory proved that pure grit and brilliant strategy could shatter superior technology anytime, anywhere. And humanity's silent withdrawal showed that you didn't have to be the king of the board to survive the game. In the end, Earth got exactly what it wanted: safety guaranteed by its own power, and peace guaranteed by sending a very simple message: leave us alone, or you'll be sorry. The galaxy learned to give that quiet corner of space a very, very wide berth. And so, the galaxy learned to keep its distance. Back in the command center, Representative Chen allowed herself a tiny, satisfied smile as she reviewed the latest reports. The plan had worked flawlessly. Earth was safe, humanity was free. The rest of the galaxy, for better or for worse, was on its own. "Ma'am," an aide said, walking up to her console. "It's the Liberation Coalition again. They're asking for diplomatic talks. They want to know if we would consider sharing some of our defensive technology." Chen answered without even looking away from her screen. "Send the standard response. Our position hasn't changed. We appreciate their respect for our borders, but we are not interested in treaties or sharing technology. Tell them to keep innovating," she added, almost as an afterthought. "They've done a pretty good job on their own so far." The aide nodded and walked off. Chen went back to her screen, watching the symbols of a civilization that was rebuilding and getting stronger in the quiet safety they had fought so hard for. Earth was closed for business, and it was going to stay that way for as long as it had to. Because humanity had learned the single hardest lesson the universe has to teach. In the end, the only one you can truly count on is yourself. Alliances break. Treaties become worthless pieces of paper. The only thing that lasts is the strength you build with your own two hands. The Vorthaean Empire, a dynasty that had ruled for 3 centuries, was wiped out in 14 minutes, 14. Less time than it takes to make a pot of coffee. And that was one lesson the galaxy would never, ever forget. They would remember that Earth gave them one warning, and only one: stay out. And the galaxy, having finally learned some common sense, did exactly that.